The Whitman family arrived at the house on Hollow Street late one gray afternoon in October. The sky was heavy, the clouds low and swollen with rain, as if nature itself hesitated to welcome them. The house rose at the end of a crooked lane, surrounded by skeletal trees that clawed the air with their bare branches. It was a sprawling Victorian, once grand, now decayed by neglect. Its roof sagged, its windows glimmered faintly like watchful eyes, and the iron gate groaned when Thomas Whitman pushed it open. Margaret Whitman, slender and pale, felt her stomach knot the moment she stepped onto the path. She brushed her fingers across the rusted bars of the fence and whispered, "It feels alive." She wasn't a woman prone to dramatics, yet something about the place pressed on her chest, as though the air itself held memory. Thomas, practical and stubborn, forced a laugh, though his grip on the box he carried tightened. "It's just a house, Margaret, nothing more." But his voice lacked conviction. Their children, bright-eyed Emily, aged 8, and restless Daniel, only 10, darted ahead. Emily twirled on the porch, her golden hair catching the dim light, while Daniel hammered at the locked door until it creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew, like a forgotten cellar. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing dark stains beneath. The staircase, that wound upward, groaned as though it carried the weight of countless footsteps. Long vanished. As night fell, Thomas made sure to lock the front door. Yet when he returned moments later with another load from the car, the door stood ajar, swaying on its hinges. He froze, the box pressing into his ribs. No one had touched it. That night, while the family huddled in their new rooms, the silence was broken by a steady tapping from the attic, deliberate, measured, not like branches in the wind. Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She swore she heard breathing at the corner of the bedroom, slow and uneven, though Thomas slept soundly beside her. When Emily whispered in the darkness that a woman had smiled at her from the upstairs window, Margaret knew, with a certainty that chilled her bones, the house was not empty. By the second night, the Whitmans had begun to sense the shifting moods of their new home. The air never felt still. Cold drafts swept beneath locked doors, carrying with them the faint smell of damp stone. Shadows gathered thick in corners, clinging to the ceilings even when lamps glowed bright. Emily asked her father over breakfast why the walls sometimes talked. Thomas nearly choked on his coffee. "What do you mean?" he asked. Emily shrugged and said, "They whisper when I'm falling asleep, like they're telling secrets, but not to me." Her tone was casual, as though such a thing were ordinary. Margaret dismissed her gently, though she herself had heard the same whispers. At night she pressed her ear to the cracked plaster and caught fragments, words carried on the edge of silence, too muffled to understand. The whispers would grow faint, then vanish the moment she tried to concentrate. Once, she thought she heard her own name. Daniel fared worse. He woke screaming just after midnight, claiming someone had tugged at his blanket. He insisted a figure had stood near his bed, its shape bending unnaturally in the glow of his night lamp. His hands shook at breakfast, milk dripping from his spoon, and when Margaret reached for him, he flinched. Desperate for clarity, she began to keep a notebook. Her entries resembled a detective's ledger. October 14th, 2:17 a.m. Whispers in the walls. Front door unlocked again. Emily speaking to someone unseen. Kitchen clock chimed 13 times. Thomas found the notebook and frowned deeply. "You're scaring the children. These stories will make things worse." Yet even he fell silent when, at midnight, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed not 12, but 13 hollow notes. Its hands froze at 12, trembling slightly as though resisting some invisible force. From behind the walls, the whispers returned, urgent now, like voices demanding to be heard. The house had secrets, and it was only beginning to share them. The third night brought with it a sense of foreboding that even Thomas could not dismiss. Rain lashed against the tall windows, tracing jagged lines down the glass like spectral fingers. The family sat huddled in the living room, trying to ignore the house settling or something else moving within it. Emily, wide-eyed, stared at the corner where the shadows seemed to gather unnaturally. "They're watching us," she whispered. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine, and even Thomas's usually steady hands trembled slightly as he refilled his coffee. Footsteps echoed overhead, soft but deliberate, pacing back and forth on the attic floor. Daniel clutched his blanket, insisting something was following him. Margaret tried to reassure him, but the sound of whispering began again, now sharper, like voices pressing against the walls. She jotted notes in her growing ledger. Emily sees shadowed figure in hallway. Footsteps above attic, 11:40 p.m. Daniel frightened. Atmosphere heavy, oppressive, as if an answer, a piano note sounded from the corner room, though the house had no piano. It was a single, low note, then silence, then another, then a series of notes, deliberate, each one striking a deeper chord in the family sphere. Thomas approached cautiously, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He reached the room, found it empty, but the faint smell of old perfume lingered. That night, the children slept fitfully. Margaret kept the notebook open on her nightstand, recording every unusual sound, every flicker of movement. The shadows seemed to move with purpose, clustering near the windows, stretching across the walls. For the first time, she felt as though the house were testing them, probing for weaknesses, drawing out their fear. In the attic, a faint scratching began like nails on old wood. Margaret froze, heart hammering. The house, she realized, had a memory, and it was alive, and whatever had lived here before had not left willingly. By the fourth day, unease had taken root. The Whitmans explored more cautiously, discovering rooms hidden behind false walls, closets that smelled of decay, and a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the floorboards. The house seemed to shift around them, corridors lengthening, doorways appearing where none had existed before. Emily screamed that she saw a woman in a tattered dress peering from the upstairs window, though Margaret could see nothing. Daniel swore he felt icy fingers brush his shoulder, yet when he turned, the room was empty. Margaret began to notice odd patterns. Objects slightly moved, doors that had been shut now wide open. One door in particular drew their attention, a heavy wooden door in the hallway, locked for reasons unknown. Thomas tried the key from the old ring he had found in the foyer, but it wouldn't turn. A strange warmth radiated from behind it, and Margaret swore she could hear soft sobbing, the sound of someone crying for release. Nightfall, bringing with it a storm that rattled the panes and sent wind howling through the eaves. Shadows stretched across the walls, dancing like sinister puppets. The whispered voices were louder now, almost intelligible. "Leave, leave, leave." Thomas, determined to assert reason, pounded on the locked door. The sound was hollow, yet inside, a faint scratching answered back. Margaret watched, a growing fear in her eyes. The house was no longer a home. It was a sentient puzzle, and each day they remained, it drew them deeper into its secrets. The children slept fitfully, murmuring in their dreams about faces in the walls and voices calling their names. Margaret and Thomas exchanged a glance, half disbelief, half terror. What had they brought themselves into? And how long before the house decided they could not leave? By the fifth evening, the Whitman's sense of unease had turned into full-blown dread. The house seemed to breathe around them, the walls exhaling a cold, musty air that carried whispers only half heard. Margaret led the children cautiously through the hallway when Emily stopped, her gaze fixed on a door they had never noticed before. It was framed in dark oak, its surface polished to a strange and natural gleam. The brass handle gleamed despite years of neglect. Emily whispered, "It's calling me." Against her better judgment, Margaret opened it, revealing a room lined with tall mirrors from floor to ceiling. Their reflections stretched unnaturally, elongating faces and twisting limbs in ways that made the heart race. Daniel hesitated at the threshold. "Mom, I don't think we should." But before Margaret could respond, a mirror cracked with a sharp snap. No one had touched it. Another crack spread, forming jagged lines like lightning across the reflective surface. From within, a shadow moved a shape too fluid to be human, yet unmistakably aware of them. Margaret felt her breath catch. The whispers surged, urgent now, overlapping in chaotic murmurs. She scribbled frantically in her notebook. Mirror distorts reality. Shadow and side moves independently. Emily mesmerized. Daniel terrified. Thomas stepped forward, but his reflection lingered a second too long in the mirror, smirking at him with a face not his own. Suddenly, a cold gust blew through the room, slamming the door behind them. Emily screamed, clutching her mother. The mirrors reflected not the room, but scenes from the house's past, faces of previous inhabitants, frozen in expressions of terror, mouths open as if screaming, hands reaching through glass as if to drag them in. Margaret knew, with a sinking certainty, that the house was not merely haunted. It was alive, feeding on fear, weaving the past and present into one nightmarish tapestry. And whatever lurked in the mirrors had already noticed them. On the sixth night, Thomas could no longer deny the house's active hostility. He resolved to explore the attic fully, determined to find a rational explanation for the disturbances. A ladder led to the narrow hatch, and as he ascended, the air grew colder, almost viscous, as if thick with unseen intent. Margaret followed reluctantly, holding Emily's hand tightly, while Daniel brought up the rear, trembling yet unable to stay behind. Dust motes swirled in the beam of their flashlight, and every step made the floorboards groan like a warning. The attic was cluttered with trunks and furniture covered in moth-eaten sheets. But at the far end, beneath a trapdoor, they discovered something far stranger. A circle of symbols etched into the wooden floor. The symbols pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if alive. Margaret recognized them from an old book she had seen in the library years ago. Sigils meant to trap spirits, yet here they seemed inverted, summoning rather than containing. A low hum began vibrating through the floor, through their bones. Emily pointed, wide-eyed. Someone's under there. No one spoke. The trapdoor began to rattle violently, as if something below was pushing upward. Daniel shrank behind Margaret, whimpering. Thomas, rationality frame, leaned down and peeked. For a moment, all he saw was darkness. Then, two glowing eyes blinked at him, to bright, to knowing, staring with recognition. The whispers returned, forming words now. You should not be here. You belong to us. Margaret grabbed Thomas's sleeve, heart pounding. The attic no longer felt like part of the house. It felt like the house itself, a living predator, reaching for them. And in that moment, all four understood. Whatever secret this attic held had been waiting, patient and hungry, for the day new tenants would arrive. The seventh night descended like a suffocating blanket over Hollow Street. The Whitmans tried to find solace in each other, but the house was relentless. Shadows no longer merely shifted, they stalked. Footsteps echoed from the attic, then from the hallways, then directly outside their bedroom doors. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, trembling. They're walking. I can hear them, she whispered. Margaret clutched her daughter's hands, feeling her own nails dig into her palms. Thomas tried to rationalize the sounds as the house settling, yet even he flinched when the faint tap 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 of boots approached their bedroom, stopping just outside the door. Daniel, curled under the blanket, insisted he saw a tall figure standing in the corner. It had no face, only darkness where features should have been, yet he felt its eyes pierce through him. Margaret wrote furiously in her notebook. Attic footsteps repeated every hour. Children seeing figures. House active, sentient. Fear intensifying. The sounds escalated to an almost rhythmic pounding, echoing through the floorboards and walls. Thomas finally decided to confront whatever haunted the house. Flashlight in hand, he stepped into the hall. The air seemed heavier, as if resisting his movement. The beam of the flashlight caught nothing but the shadows shifted, congregating along the walls. A low moan rose, growing louder with each step he took. Suddenly, the hallway door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. The whispers coalesced into one chilling phrase, "You cannot leave, Margaret," and the children screamed, pounding on the door, but it would not budge. In that moment, the Whitmans realized the house had rules, and it had drawn a line. Fear became a tangible thing, thickening around them. The footsteps never stopped. By the 8th day, the Whitmans were living in a constant state of tension. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of candlelight sent them into panic. Margaret explored the hallway alone one evening, searching for clues in the peeling wallpaper. That's when she noticed it. A thin seam in the wall, perfectly vertical, easily missed if one wasn't looking closely. Her pulse quickened. She pushed gently and the wall gave way, revealing a narrow passage, dust-choked by years of neglect. It smelled of damp earth and old decay. Margaret called for Thomas, and together they ventured in, children following hesitantly. The passage wound downward, deeper into darkness, the air growing colder with every step. At the end, they discovered a small chamber, filled with relics of the house's past, old portraits, broken toys, letters yellowed with age. Each item seemed to hum with memory. On the far wall, a large painting of a stern woman with piercing eyes watched them. Margaret's stomach churned. She felt certain those eyes followed them. Daniel found a loose floorboard beneath the painting. It revealed a hidden compartment containing a bundle of old keys and a journal. Margaret read aloud from the faded pages, and the entries told of the house's original occupants, their obsessions, and a ritual intended to trap something that had grown restless over the decades. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. The whispers returned, angry and urgent, swirling around the chamber. The shadows pressed in, bending light and reality. Emily clung to Margaret, shivering. The house, Margaret realized with a horror that tightened her chest, had been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. And now, the Whitmans had igniting forces far older and far darker than they could comprehend. By the 9th night, the Whitmans were prisoners of the house. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as though alive. Shadows moved independently, twisting around corners and across ceilings. The children barely slept, waking at every whisper, every creak, their eyes wide with fear. Margaret, notebook in hand, tried to piece together the house's logic. The journal from the hidden passage suggested a pattern. The house fed on attention, on fear, and on trespass. Every disturbance, every gaze into forbidden rooms strengthened it. The mirrors, the locked doors, the attic, they were all instruments of control. Suddenly, the chandelier above the dining room exploded into a shower of glass, narrowly missing Daniel. The temperature plummeted. Their breaths formed clouds in the icy air. Then the whispers formed words clearly. You opened what should remain closed. Now you belong. Thomas tried to hold the family together, forcing them toward the front door, but the hallway stretched impossibly long, doors appearing and disappearing as they ran. Emily screamed as a shadow lunged from the wall, her small frame barely escaping its grasp. Margaret grabbed her hand, dragging her forward, while Daniel clutched his father's coat, shaking uncontrollably. From the attic came a shrill, unearthly laughter. The house pulsed, reacting to their panic, and the floor beneath them creaked ominously, as if preparing to swallow them whole. Margaret's notebook fell open, pages fluttering wildly. The words seemed to rearrange themselves. Only truth can free you. Face the past, or be consumed. The family realized with horror that escape depended on uncovering the house's deepest secret, the one it had been hiding for decades. And the house, it was not willing to wait. The final night arrived like a storm unleashed. Margaret, Thomas, Emily, and Daniel descended into the hidden chamber once more, determined to confront the house's dark heart. The shadows swirled around them, voices chanting, twisting reality. The journal and keys lay before them, the relics of long-dead inhabitants pulsing with memory. Following the instructions in the journal, Margaret arranged the items precisely, aligning symbols, mirrors, and keys. She recited the words written in trembling ink, her voice echoing in the chamber. Return what is taken. Release what is trapped. We acknowledge the past. The air thickened, and a chilling presence filled the room. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman in tattered Victorian clothing, eyes hollow but burning with ancient rage. She spoke without words, her voice inside their minds. You dare disturb me, Emily cried out, but Margaret's steady hand guided the children. Thomas held the door closed as the woman moved, a whirlwind of darkness circling the chamber. Then, with a final shuddering exhale, the figure screamed, and the shadows collapsed inward, vanishing into the floorboards. The air lightened. The oppressive weight lifted. The house fell silent, unnaturally still. The hallway no longer stretched endlessly. The doors stayed where they belonged. The Whitmans, trembling and exhausted, stepped outside into the first light of dawn. The Victorian house loomed quietly behind them, its secret sealed once more, but now its gaze seemed wary, almost respectful. Margaret looked at her children. Daniel's wide eyes, Emily's trembling hands. They had survived the house's wrath, but they all knew some places remembered, and some forces, even when defeated, waited patiently for the next curious soul to arrive. The house on Hollow Street was quiet for now.